Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The dawn was still a whisper when Diep stepped out, her bamboo basket brimming with corn she'd harvested from James's fields. The air hung heavy with mist, cloaking the hills in a veil that softened their edges, and the dirt path gleamed red under her sandals, slick from the night's rain. Somewhere beyond the bamboo groves, a waterfall sang its ceaseless lullaby, blending with the distant crow of a rooster and the faint laughter of children waking in the village. Diep's breath misted in the cool morning, but her heart carried a weight no basket could match. James's father was here, his presence a shadow trailing her steps, and she wondered if he'd ever see her as more than a girl from the hills. She stopped where the path curved toward the stream, its waters catching the first rays of sun like scattered coins. Setting her basket down, she knelt, letting the corn's golden husks rest against the earth. The stream was cold as she cupped water in her hands, its chill biting her palms, grounding her thoughts. This was where James had brought her months ago, his hand warm in hers, his eyes bright with promises. "This land Diep," he'd said, gesturing to the fields that stretched wide under the mountain's watchful gaze. "It's ours. We'll grow a life here, fields, a home, maybe children someday." She'd smiled then, her heart as open as the sky above, believing love could root as deeply as the rice they planted. But now those fields stood half empty, the rice forsaken for plans she couldn't grasp, and his father's arrival had cast a frost over their dreams. Diep lingered by the stream, her reflection wavering in the water. A girl with dark eyes and calloused hands, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. She thought of her mother, gone these many years, who'd taught her to read the earth's moods, to plant by the moon's phases, to carry on when the world turned heavy. "You're stronger than you know," her mother had said, her voice rough but tender, and Diep clung to those words now, letting them steady her against the doubts that swirled like leaves in the current. What did James's father want, watching her from afar? Did he see her labor, her love, or only her lack? Her fifth-grade schooling, her bamboo shack, her life woven from earth and toil? She hoisted her basket, the corn shifting with a soft rustle, and continued toward the market. The village was stirring now, its rhythm as familiar as her own heartbeat. Smoke curled from thatched roofs, weaving patterns in the dawn, and the scent of boiling rice mingled with the tang of charcoal and dew-soaked grass. Her shack lay just beyond the bend, its walls weathered but steadfast, a small world she'd built with her own hands. She pictured Hockey, her little dog, waiting there, his tail a blur of joy at her return, and the thought brought a fleeting warmth. But it couldn't quiet the question that gnawed at her. Would James's father ever accept her, or would he uproot the love she and James had planted? At the market, Diep spread her mat under a tamarind tree, its leaves whispering secrets to the breeze. "Fresh corn, 10,000 dong," she called, arranging the cobs in neat rows, their husks gleaming like gold in the morning light. Her voice rang clear, but beneath it lay a heaviness, a tremor she hoped no one heard. Buyers drifted by, their voices a soft hum. Some haggled, others offered smiles that felt like small blessings. An old woman, her face etched like the bark of an ancient tree, picked up a cob and studied it, her eyes kind. "Good harvest, child," she said, pressing a crumpled bill into Diep's hand. "You've got your mother's hand, strong, steady." Diep nodded, her throat tight. Her mother's hands had carried her through childhood, teaching her to husk corn, to mend nets, to face the world with quiet courage. Now she needed that courage more than ever. The sun climbed, burning away the mist, and Diep's pile of corn dwindled. She wiped sweat from her brow, her thoughts drifting to James. He was at the foot of the mountain, negotiating over land, 6 hectares he'd rent for 5 years, maybe 10, to grow cabbages, lettuce, anything but the rice that kept the village tethered to old ways. She'd overheard him last night, his voice steady as he spoke of profits and progress, of breaking the cycle that left farmers with full granaries but empty pockets. He'd asked her once to join his company, to trade her basket for a desk, but she'd laughed, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'm no good with numbers, James," she'd said. "I belong here with the earth, with people." He'd smiled, but she'd seen the flicker of worry in his eyes, as if he feared she'd never fit the life he was building. A shadow fell across her mat, pulling her from her thoughts. "Diep," James said, his voice low, his shirt damp with the morning's work. His face was taut, lines creasing his brow, and for a moment she thought he looked older, weighed down by something unspoken. "I need to talk to you," he said, his words careful like stones placed on a fragile bridge. Her heart quickened, a mix of hope and fear, but before she could ask, a man called for corn and she turned away, her hands trembling as she weighed the cobs. When she looked back, James was gone, his absence a hollow ache, sharper than the basket's weight on her shoulders. The afternoon passed in a blur of sales and small talk, but Diep's mind lingered on James's words. What did he need to say? Was it about his father, whose eyes seemed to follow her even now, hidden in the village's folds? She'd heard whispers that he'd sent someone to trail James to report his every move. Why? Did he doubt his son's ambitions, or was it her he questioned? A girl with no wealth beyond the calluses on her hands, no learning beyond the songs her mother sang? She thought of the fields, of the dreams they'd woven under starlit skies. A sturdy house, laughter echoing through the hills, a life where love was enough. Would those dreams survive his father's scrutiny, or would they crumble like dry earth underfoot? As dusk settled, Diep packed her empty basket and started home. The path was quiet now, the village easing into evening's embrace. Fireflies blinked in the shadows, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and wood smoke, wrapping her in a fleeting peace. Her shack came into view and Hockey bounded out, his yips shattering the silence. She knelt, scratching his ears, his warmth a balm against the day's uncertainties. "You're all I've got, little one," she murmured, and Hockey tilted his head as if he understood. Inside, she lit the stove, the flames casting shadows that danced like ghosts of her past. She sliced pumpkin, its sweetness filling the air, and fried eggs, their sizzle a small comfort in the stillness. She moved with care, each task a ritual to anchor her thoughts, but they drifted still, to James, to his father, to the future she couldn't see. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, telling stories of bamboo flutes carved from rice stalks, blown to call the rain when drought scorched the land. "The gods listen," her mother had said, but Diep wasn't sure anymore. She only knew she loved James, loved him with a fierceness that scared her, and she'd fight to keep him, if he'd fight for her too. James arrived as the moon rose, its light slipping through the cracks in the walls, painting the floor in silver. He carried a basket of his own, filled with rice and greens, and set it down with a sheepish grin. "I cooked," he said, and Diep laughed, the sound easing the knot in her chest. They sat by the hearth, the table between them laden with simple dishes. Eggs golden and crisp, pumpkin soft as a sigh, rice steaming in a clay pot. Hockey curled up nearby, his eyes bright with contentment, and for a moment the world felt small, safe, theirs alone. They ate in comfortable silence at first, the clink of chopsticks a quiet music. Then James spoke, his voice soft but earnest. "Diep, I'm serious about you. About us." Her heart leaped, a fragile hope taking root, but before she could reply, he continued, his words tumbling out. "Someone asked me today, why haven't I given you more? A house, a job, something better than this." He gestured at the shack, his eyes clouded with guilt, and Diep felt a pang sharp and sudden. She set her bowl down, her hand steady despite the storm inside. "This is enough," she said, her voice firm, though it trembled at the edges. "I don't need a new house, James. I don't need your money. I need you here like this." She paused, her gaze meeting his, searching for the warmth she'd always found there. It was still there, but shadowed, as if his father's presence had dimmed the light between them. "Who asked you that?" she said, though she already knew. James hesitated, his hand brushing hers, his touch warm but fleeting. "My father," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's watching us, Diep. I don't know what he thinks, but I won't let him change how I feel." Her heart thudded, a mix of relief and dread. She nodded, but his words felt like stones in her chest, heavy with questions she couldn't voice. What could she offer a man whose father measured worth in land and wealth? She thought of her childhood, running through bamboo groves, chasing fireflies under a sky that seemed endless. Back then love was simple, a shared laugh, a hand to hold. Now it was a battle, and she wasn't sure she knew the rules. They finished their meal, the air thick with unspoken fears. James helped her clear the table, his movements slow, as if he were reluctant to leave. He paused by the door, his silhouette framed against the moonlight, and looked back at her. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, his smile strained, and Diep nodded, her throat too tight for words. She watched him go, his figure swallowed by the night, and felt a pang she couldn't name. A longing for the days when love was enough, when no one stood between them. Alone she sat by the hearth, the fire's glow fading to embers. The book on the table caught her eye. A worn primer she'd borrowed from the village school, its pages filled with words she struggled to grasp. She traced the cover, her fingers lingering on the faded ink. She wanted to learn to grow, not just for James but for herself, for the girl who'd once dreamed of more than fields and baskets. Her mother had never learned to read, but she carried a wisdom deeper than words, teaching Diep to listen to the earth, to trust her own heart. Now that heart was torn between love and fear, between holding on and letting go. She stepped outside, hockey at her heels, and looked up at the sky. The stars were sharp, each one a pinprick of hope, but they felt distant tonight, like dreams just out of reach. She thought of the bamboo flutes her grandmother had spoken of, carved from rice stalks to call the rain when the land grew parched. The gods listen, her grandmother had said, her eyes crinkling with faith, and as a child Diep had believed it, blowing tunes until her breath ran dry. Now she wasn't sure what she believed, only that she loved James with a fierceness that scared her, and she'd fight to keep him, if he'd fight for her too. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the rustle of leaves and hockey's soft whines. In her dreams she saw James's father, his eyes unreadable, standing at the edge of the fields, his silence louder than words. She reached for James, but he was gone, leaving only the sound of water rushing over stones, endless and cold. She woke to dawn's first light, her body weary but her resolve unbroken. She rose, fed hockey, and packed her basket once more. The corns weighed a familiar companion. The market awaited, the village awaited, life awaited. As she stepped onto the path, the mist curling around her like a shawl, she thought of James's father. He was watching, judging, his gaze a weight she couldn't shake. Would he see her? The strength in her hands, the fire in her soul, the love that burned brighter than any doubt? Or would he turn away, taking James with him, leaving her with nothing but the earth she'd always known? Diep didn't know. The path stretched ahead, winding through hills that held both her past and her future. She shifted her basket, its weight grounding her, steadying her steps. Today she'd sell her corn, smile at strangers, and carry on, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the morning's song. But in that heart a question lingered, soft as moonlight, sharp as stone. Would love be enough to hold them together? Or would it slip through her fingers like water from the stream? The answer wasn't here, not yet. It lay somewhere beyond the fields, beyond the hills, in a moment she couldn't yet see. For now Diep walked on, her steps steady, her soul a flickering flame that refused to fade.